Carolina football had a loaded class of 2022, very highly ranked, but the class of 2023 is off to a slow start. So, John Garcia Jr. and I today break down several of Carolina's recruiting targets in the next class. All coming up on today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Thursday, May 19th, 2022. Welcome into Locked On Tar Heels. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, beat writer for Sports Illustrated's All Tar Heels website. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen or your first watch every single day. Please don't forget that we are free and available everywhere you get podcasts, so go ahead, subscribe now. If you're watching on YouTube, please also make sure to smash that like button, comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these class of 2023 targets. Today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. Before we get into the interview, I need to apologize. The audio on John Garcia Jr.'s side is phenomenal, but there was a little bit of some audio on my side of things, and so you're going to be able to hear it. It sounds like I'm in a closet, and it's a little bit faded, and so just dial in, and you will be able to hear it fine. All right, here we go. My interview with John Garcia Jr. talking some class of 2023 football targets. I am excited to once again be joined here today on Locked On Tar Heels by Sports Illustrated's Director of Football Recruiting, Mr. John Garcia Jr. John, great to have you on. For North Carolina, there hasn't been much movement in the class of 2023 yet after a ton of kids coming in 2022. And so what I want to do today is just hop around a little bit at three guys who are at different levels of this recruiting process. One that's already committed to Carolina, one that's picked up a crystal ball for Carolina, and one that seems like he's probably leaning somewhere else, but the Tar Heels are still in the mix for. So, in the class of 23, Carolina has two people committed right now. One is quarterback Tad Hudson, and the other just committed a couple weeks ago, and that's who we're going to talk about first, and that is offensive tackle Mr. Nolan McConnell.
Yeah, this is a strong fit for what Carolina wants to do. Isaac, Nolan is first of all, he's massive, right? 6'6". I mean, he lists himself at 6'7". So even if he's lying a little bit, he's still a very tall human being, 275, 280 or so. So right where you want him in terms of height and weight right now. You rather add weight to an offensive lineman than have to shed that weight in order for him to play in the ACC. So I think from a height and weight standpoint, he's exactly where you want to be. You look at his film, and there's a whole lot of run blocking. There's not a lot of finesse in his high school offense. And look, it kind of is what it is. So you don't take that against some of these prospects. So you go the other way and you say, okay, well, we'll see about the pass blocking later, but what does he do so very well? And man, this is a bulldozing run blocker. He plays a lot of positions on the offensive line as well. So he's got some versatility. And that's something that is certainly an asset going into his senior season up in the state of Virginia. He's played left tackle, right tackle, even a little bit guard as a junior based on the available tape. And like I said, point of attack monster, leverage monster, which is not something you would expect with a 6'6", 6'7" recruit. But that is one of the benefits of playing in such a run-heavy offense is he's going to be a low pad level leverage guy. The old school O-line coaches used to talk about the flat back. I need you to flat back this guy. And a lot of plays you see him with that flat back, even though he's 6'6", 6'7", and he's ragdogging a lot of players on the defensive side of the ball. To boot, even on one clip, Isaac, he threw a defensive lineman into the ref and both of them fell down. So he's got some nasty in him, a lot of the foundational traits you want along the offensive line, and he pulls a little bit, so you do get a little sample of his athleticism. I think he's got enough athletic traits to become a capable pass blocker. We just don't get to see it a whole lot on Friday night, so that's certainly where you would want to see a little bit more at the next level. But look, the foundation, the frame, all of that is there for McConnell. So I think it's a nice get, and it's an in-region get, which is always important in plugging into the ACC footprint.
Absolutely, and Carolina's tapped into Virginia a lot since Mack Brown has been back and had good success there. What you're talking about with him makes me think of that scene from Blind Side where he just takes the dude and runs him all the way down the field and dumps him across the fence. That offensive line versatility that you talked about, obviously he's listed as a tackle, but being able to shift around positionally, how much of a bump does that give a player either in recruitability or as we think about draftability at the next level?
It's a huge one, because so many of these O linemen are just the best linemen at their high schools. So where they're going to play, left tackle. They're all going to be a left tackle, even if we think they're a center or a guard or even a right tackle at the next level. So some of these run-heavy schemes, they do move linemen around. And look, I'm sure McConnell's the best O lineman on that team, and they do run behind him plenty, but it's not just at one position. And I think that's a good thing because it teaches you some flexibility. I think – you talk to an offensive lineman and they will tell you even just lining up on the other side of the offensive line for a lot of them is so very foreign because it's 1 foot up versus the other, one hand down versus the other, and it kind of takes you out of sync a little bit. We see this a little bit with receivers and defensive backs too, relative to staying on one side of the field or going back and forth, but even more so with offensive linemen because obviously they're just bigger. It's a lot more weight to hold up and to be functional with. So having that background already, I think, is a huge asset for his game. And again, I mean, he's a run blocker by trade because of the scheme that he's in, and he's really, really good at it. And he's got this frame also that, you can build onto. So I think that creates even more versatility in his game. I think right now, because of that lack of pass rush, the pass protection prowess, I should say, he's probably more of a right tackle, probably a guy I would feel more comfortable with on the right side or at guard. But again, he's already lined up and performed at all of those spots, even if he does end up as a left tackle down the line. So I like that from a foundational standpoint. The physical in terms of lining up, that first step, those things, those won't have to be taught to him because he's already been there and done that. And that's just one step further along when you start to think about assimilating towards a college offensive line.
Man, that's great to hear. Last thing I want to ask you about him, I noticed in his recruiting profile that his lead recruiter was new offensive line coach Jack McNell, who's only been with Carolina since spring practice started. So that must have moved through really quickly. But when you see a new offensive line coach come in and get somebody, what does it kind of say about how quickly they've been able to develop a relationship?
Not just the relationship, Isaac, but the execution of him as a coach. I think when you talk about spring practice visits, they're not like as exciting as official visits or game visits, right? At least perceptually. But one of the things you can really dig into as a recruit is the coaching style of your future position coach if you pick that school. And I know McConnell took, I believe, multiple spring visits to UNC to check out the new coach in action. And McNell was really comfortable with his players. He said the communication between each side was really, really strong. So that really gives you an advantage if you do have some coaching transition, which most schools deal with every year, to get a little bit ahead with certain positions. And obviously they hit the ground running off the field in terms of building the relationship and targeting each other. But on the field, McConnell saw plenty to like in McNell's coaching style, which is really something that doesn't get talked about enough in the recruiting game, because obviously if you're going to go play for a school, that position coach is going to be the guy you spend the most time with, meeting rooms, texting, obviously on the field, the guy yelling at you the most, that's going to be your position coach. So you want to make sure that part and that relationship is as solid as possible before you make a decision.
Interesting, man. Well, that's got to be an encouraging sign for Tar Heel fans to hear how quickly he has ingratiated himself to recruits as well. Well, we're going to move to the other side of the line in just a second and talk about another Carolina target on the defensive side of the ball. But first, let me tell you just a little bit about Bet Online. Our partners at Bet Online continue to be the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. Find all the latest odds, news, and developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So head to the website today or grab your mobile device to learn more about all the trends in action. Bet online, where the game starts. Make sure to go check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin to give you fans an in-depth look at the NBA draft, some mock drafts, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available everywhere you get podcasts. We are back on Locked On Tar Heels, joined by John Garcia Jr. Great, as always, to have him on. We're talking Carolina class of 2023 football targets, and we just talked about an offensive lineman. Now we're going to shift to the D-line and talk about in-state player Daevin Hobbs. He is not a Carolina commit. However, the Tar Heels have received a crystal ball for him. And so this guy, John, what have you got for us on Daevin?
Yeah, shout out to Brian Doe, an old colleague of mine at 24/7 for that one. Yeah, this is an interesting prospect. Concord, North Carolina, like you said, not far from that big, massive Bass Pro Shops. I think that's the biggest one I've ever seen.
It's huge.
Yeah, he's a really interesting prospect, two-sport guy, and two-way player on Friday nights, too. You know, he's not a bad tight end, but certainly his future on the football field is coming off the edge, rushing the passer. North Carolina is the school we grew up rooting for. They finally offered this spring, and that was certainly big for his recruiting process. I think everything was kind of flipped on its head at that point. And you could see why, Brian felt compelled enough to jump in with the crystal ball projection. I would probably do the same if I was still at that network.
Okay.
Again, you grew up a fan, you've taken the most visits to one school, they finally offer, and you react the way we think you're going to react. That's usually pretty telling. I do think that some other schools are in the mix here, though. Penn State recently got him on campus. He liked that. I believe he was checking out Clemson or NC State this past weekend. So there's still some other schools fighting to stay in the mix. And I think with Daevin, there's no true timeline to wrap things up. So I do think from the Carolina perspective, if he does start to accelerate the process, that's a very good sign. But look, right now there's only one official visit scheduled, and it's to UNC. So that's usually a pretty good sign as far as where things are heading. He's saying it without saying it is what they say. So if it's happening a little bit sooner rather than later, I think it's good news for Carolina. And this would be a really big pickup, not only beating Penn State, Clemson, some other schools for a top in-state recruit and a regional recruit, but this is an athletic freak. Like I said, two sports, two-way player, really quick off of the football, and one of those raw athletes where you just know, even though he's been incredibly productive in high school, his best football is well ahead. And I think we could all agree, Isaac, that offensively North Carolina has been able to put together a ton of talent and success. Defensively is where you kind of want to see more progress, right?
Absolutely.
So anytime you're in it for a defensive recruit of this stature that is coveted by some of these schools, I mean, Clemson and Penn State are known for churning out front seven guys. That makes you feel a little bit better, not only to compete with them, but to potentially be ahead of the race for an in-stater. So I think that's lining up pretty well for Gene Chizik and company.
Man, that's great to hear. And Mack Brown, we've already talked about Mack Brown's recruiting, but he has said over and over, we will win the state of North Carolina. We're going to keep guys in Chapel Hill. And so, as you say, this would be a huge get. And Carolina has started bringing in some bigger name, bigger star defensive linemen. And so it would be nice to add him to that mix. You talked in that statement about saying it without saying it. And I think a lot of fans often hear that where it's like, I mean, it seems like this guy's leaning to this place. Why doesn't he just go ahead and do it? When fans see that, is it safe for them 9 times out of 10 to just assume? What are we waiting on in those scenarios?
I think it's just the experiences at some of these campuses. You have to think of it as a business decision. Yes, emotionally, with his family and geographically, yeah. It's Carolina, it's done, all of that. But this is the business of college football. There's a lot to be said for keeping your options open and at least seeing where some of these new scholarship offers could come in. Because like we said, Carolina just offered last month. It's not like this was his first offer 2 years ago, and it's just been this matter of when and not if. Like even Carolina was waiting to see a little bit more from this kid, at least athletically, in terms of offering a scholarship. So if he's starting to line up offers with the schools that he's long envisioned, waiting a little bit longer might allow for more to jump into that race. So if you come out and say, I'm committed to Carolina, or that's my leader, and there's like no other way I'm going anywhere else, it could potentially limit some of those new opportunities that come in. And regardless of your favorite school being in the mix or not, you want the more, the more the better, right? You want as many options as possible, especially, at a position like that where there's a lot of premium put on pass rushing. I mean, the game's a passing game, right? So if you're a quarterback, offensive tackle, pass rusher, corner, your stock is up just because of your position. I mean, look at the NFL draft that we just had, right? 2 corners in the top 5, a bunch of edge rushers, including the number 1 pick in the draft. So all of that stuff, to me, factors in. And that's when you think of the people around the prospect, right? The high school coach, maybe the mentors, other people he's connected with. Those things do factor in to maybe slow down a recruit, even though on paper it looks like it's kind of a no-brainer for the Carolina Tar Heels.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. You talked about being a 2-sport athlete, and he is a basketball player. What does that extra different type of footwork, that different type of physicality, how does that impact, especially a defensive lineman who's got to be so physical? How does that help?
Look, there's I know, this is a Carolina podcast, so they will understand it on your audience. But look, you got to play physical on the basketball court. You talk about rebounding, defending. You've got to really, get in there. And I think that's some of the aspects that really translate over to the defensive line. You talk about positioning for a rebound and playing with leverage. Those go hand in hand in both sports. Extending, maximizing, the wingspan that you have, obviously huge in rebounding, very big as a defensive lineman coming off of a block, extending, identifying, where the ball carrier might be headed, and then disengaging with that offensive lineman, which is a lateral ask, which is, again, on the basketball court, you're moving around laterally a whole lot more than you are in football, especially with the 3-second rules changing on the defensive side of the ball. So I do think that there's a whole lot of correlation. I think basketball and track are the most popular number 2 sports for top football recruits. And it's for good reason. There's a lot of teachable things. And look, at a minimum, Isaac, this is going to be a kid who's in shape, a big 250-pounder who can run up and down the court and notch and register a whole bunch of double-doubles like he does at the high school level. That tells you a lot. That tells you he's a two-way player in terms of offense and defense, just like he does on Friday nights on the football field. So I think at a minimum, you're going to get a kid who just has a bit of a better work ethic because he has to play basketball and maintain a certain weight to be, not too big in that sport. So I think there's a ton of advantages for bringing in 2-sport guys, particularly basketball players or track stars. I mean, those are the 2 that I think almost every coach would say. Maybe wrestling's close there too. They would say, hey, I want him to play that other sport when he's not playing football. Yeah.
Well, I guess that rules me out as a baseball player. I'll just have to stick to that. Well, we've been talking about some linemen. We're going to move out to the skills positions out on the edge here in just a second. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Built Bar. Imagine dipping your fingers into a plastic tub of birthday cake frosting only to realize, it was just 150 calories and you got 16 grams of protein. That's what it's like to eat a Built Puffs birthday cake. Oh my goodness, I just got some this past weekend from Built, and I gotta be honest, I've never had anything like this. I hadn't tried the Puffs before. It's such an interesting and different consistency, wrapped up in 100% white chocolate with little sprinkles on them. Listen, these are limited time only, these birthday cake Puffs, so make sure you go order yours today at Built.com. Remember that all of Built's content is healthy for you, but it also tastes good. In addition to the calories and protein, there's only 9 grams of sugar in each one of these limited time flavor puffs. So that means you need to hop on this right now. And keep in mind that these Built Puffs come with collagen protein, which your body is able to absorb more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits for you. So go to Built.com right now and order yourself some birthday cake puffs. While you're there, use promo code LOCKED15 and you're going to get 15% off that order. Again, promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We are joined once again today by John Garcia Jr. We're talking class of 2023 targets for the Carolina football team. We've been talking some linemen, and now we're going to move to a receiver, and that is Noah Rogers, who has Carolina in his top 5, but are the Tar Heels at the top of the heap? We're going to have to find out. What do you have for us, John?
Yeah, that's a tough top 5 to crack for a wide receiver. Look, I mean, he's a big physical wide out. He is an in-state recruit, so there is that. But look, Ohio State and Clemson being on the list for a big receiver just optically is hard to overcome. And then he's right down the road from Raleigh at NC State as well. So I think this is a loaded top group for Noah Rogers, and rightfully so. He's one of my favorite receivers to track in this class of 2023. I got to see him in person a couple weeks back at a camp, and he's a stud and big, physical, legit 6'2", 200 pounds or so. And, man, there's polish in this kid's game. He plucks the ball away from his body, comfortable running routes underneath, and can break down a defensive back in the route or just out-rebound him. We were just talking about basketball. He can just position himself with that wide frame and just out-rebound and position a defensive back. So a really strong possession receiver. So you could see why he's got the offer list that he does have. But look, there's some appeal to Carolina. His brother's on the roster.
That's right.
In-state. I mean, obviously Raleigh's right down the road, which means Chapel Hill's not far after that, coming from the east side of Raleigh. So I do think there's some appeal to Carolina. For the Tar Heel fans listening, you want this thing to stretch out. You want this recruitment to go a little bit longer, because the sooner it goes, I think Ohio State is just, look, what they've done at receiver has been unbelievable, right? I mean, those 2 years ago, the wide receiver room at Ohio State had guys who went, I think, 9, 10, and 11 in the draft that happened last month. I mean, it's absurd what they've done at that position, so you could understand why that's tough to beat. We mentioned Clemson and NC State right there as well. So if he's going to commit sooner rather than later, probably not the best situation for Carolina, but if he extends it a little bit longer, takes official visits over a longer stretch of time, then I think Carolina and NC State can begin to make a move, because the season could start and maybe those offenses can show a little bit more in the passing game. So I do think Rogers is an interesting recruit. You can kind of make the sell for multiple schools on his list. So with him, it's really more about the timeline. Are you going to do it now, or are you going to wait? And I think the better scenario certainly is waiting if you're a Carolina fan or an NC State fan, maybe even a Clemson fan. I mean, everybody could be looking up at Ohio State with what they've done at the position, and you really couldn't blame anyone for going there.
No, absolutely not. And one of the things that interests me that you talked about is his ability to both, I'd also say willingness to go underneath, but also to be able to go out on the perimeter and out-rebound guys with that 6'2" frame. And in this era where we see so many specialized slot guys or outside guys, is that part of what makes him so coveted, is his both willingness and ability to move around the whole route tree?
Absolutely. We fall in love with the speed guys, right? The Tyreek Hills of the world who can just take the top off of a defense, or those specialists that are great route runners, smaller, slender type receivers. But look, when it's 3rd and 6, and the quarterback's got a defensive end barreling down on him, you want to throw to a reliable, bigger target who may be covered positionally, right? The DB might be in position, but because of the physicality, the catch radius, and the hands that Rogers has, you can kind of use him as almost a hybrid, like a tight end almost, where he's bailing you out in tight window throws because of the ability to compete for the football at the catch point. So that is really an invaluable asset in today's game. Even when you talk about red zone, sideline plays, I mean, how many back shoulder throws do we see in football at every level? Yeah. All of those new trends really point to a guy like Rogers anyway. But on the floor level, he's a great route runner who's going to be able to contend in the intermediate range in particular. And there's really unlimited value associated with that because, like I said, when it hits the fan, you're going to go to a reliable option, right. And he profiles that way. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you an anecdotal question. I know you don't have numbers and percentages in front of you, but how often does the family role win out over maybe like higher coveted school? And so whether it's older brother going there or dad went there or whatever it is.
It's probably about 50-50, honestly. It's not overwhelmingly successful in either direction. I do think that, with brothers in particular, there's always seemingly one that's recruited at a higher clip. And certainly Noah's been recruited at a higher clip than his older brother, who's just a freshman at North Carolina.
Right.
So I do think those are one of the predetermined factors that could have the brothers playing at different programs. But it also goes the other way a bunch too. I mean, obviously playing with Big Bro is something that they've already done. And the thought of doing it at the same college has to be intriguing. I'm sure they've talked about it their whole lives, really. And especially since his brother enrolled, I think he just enrolled in the summer at Carolina. So I'm sure those conversations are pretty prevalent at the moment. And worst case scenario, Isaac, Noah's got a quick phone call resource to get more intel on what it would be like to play at North Carolina. So again, as time goes on, if he can hold off, I think it helps the Heels angle in just about every way.
And you kind of started to allude to this there just a little bit, but I think in this era of the new transfer rules, it's like you might go to Columbus first, but we've just seen that pipeline open up early this spring. Don't lose hope, Tar Heels fans, right? Because there's always the possibility hey, let me get 3 years under my belt at Ohio State or whatever it is, and then maybe come down and join Cyrus to wrap things up before I head off to the draft.
Yeah, that's a great point, Isaac. I've talked to college coaches that say, hey, look, we're probably not going to get this kid, but we're going to stay in the race because the player movement situations are more fluid than ever and palpable, right? It's not even the kids you think are going to transfer because of obvious reasons. They transfer, but so do starters, and so do players who we feel like aren't even under consideration to transfer. We've seen a lot of surprises in the portal for a lot of different reasons, but playing with someone or coming home are still common among those decisions. So, yeah, college coaches, even if they're trailing, they're going to stay on a lot of these kids because things can change in a hurry. I mean, there's a receiver at Utah who enrolled in January and already hit the portal, before the first game, right? Before he finished the semester. So this thing is as fluid as it's ever been, and I don't see that changing in the near future. So certainly worth keeping an eye on all these recruits, even if you miss early. And that's the other side of it, right? You can commit to Ohio State now, but there's a long way until December, and a lot can change relative to the coaching staffs, the depth charts, injuries, the receiver rooms you're looking at. So much can change during the season. I mean, look at last year. I mean, an unbelievable year of change in college football in just about every way, and it really impacted recruiting, of course. So if he does commit early, I do expect North Carolina to continue to recruit him, even if he's not, pledged to their colors.
Yep. Got to wait until that paper comes in on signing day, boys. We'll look and see. All right, listen, folks. John Garcia Jr. has to get out of here, but for those watching, John, just flash him that tan line you got yesterday on your. What? John was out at a camp yesterday looking at quarterbacks, and he got a nice little tan line on his watch there.
Yeah, check it out. So when you go into the Tennessee Southern Heat, you might come out with a bit of a tan.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with the people.
Yeah, we do what we can, brother.
That's right. Thank you, as always, for all your great intel and insight. Can't wait to see all the movement with these guys. Hope you have a great day.
Likewise, Isaac. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Peace. Well, that's it for today's episode of Locked on Tar Heels. Thanks again to John Garcia Jr. for joining me. He does such a great job. Please go subscribe to the show wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, would you take a moment to rate and review the show? That would help us out so much. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnHeels. You can follow John Garcia on Twitter at JohnGarcia_Jr., just JR. And you can follow me at Isaac Schade, ISAACSCHADE. Thanks so much again for making Locked on Tar Heels your first listen or your first watch every day. Coming up on tomorrow's show, this is awesome. We're going to interview incoming freshman basketball player Jalen Washington. Such a nice young man. Can't wait for you to hear from him. Now, go make Locked on ACC your second listen of the day. Get all your daily ACC news in less than 30 minutes. Free and available wherever you get podcasts. Hey, thanks again so much for spending part of your Thursday talking with me and John, diving into this community. Can't wait to see who Mack Brown and company can keep bringing in for the class of 23. Hey, remember, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Until tomorrow, peace!